Good afternoon and welcome to the Archive Effect panel of Versio Film Festival. I am very happy to present to you this special selection of 8 wonderful, powerful films that are in the program, and about 4 of them we will be talking in more details. So we have very special and very welcomed guests here with us tonight on Zoom, or this afternoon on Zoom, and the discussion will take place approximately an hour and 45 minutes, and at the end you will also have a chance to ask your questions. My name is Oksana Sarkisova. I am film historian researcher at Blinken Open Society Archives at Central European University, an institution that organizes Versio Film Festival together with Versio Film Foundation. And I'm director of the festival, and I'm also curator of the Archive of the Planet section, which is dealing with the issues and brings together films that explore how images construct and shape our understanding of the past and the present. So there are 4 films and 5 filmmakers that are joining us today. I will briefly introduce them to you. I'll start with Susanne Kovács, who is director of the film It Takes a Family. Susanna, welcome, joining us from California, but having a Hungarian premiere, so congratulations. We are very happy that film is part of Versio. Susanna is a TV director from the Danish Media and Journalism School. She previously studied fine arts and storytelling in Germany, and was also training in the European Film College in Ebeltoft in Denmark. And it's her first full feature documentary, so very, very happy it is part of our program. It was participating in the IDFAcademy in 2016, and by now it's all ready, and I recommend everyone to watch it, and we will discuss it in more detail soon. Then I'm happy to introduce you to 2 directors, co-directors of film Exit of the Trains. Adrian Giovlink, who is historian, director of the Wilhelm Wildermann Center for the Study of Jewish History in Romania. He's also a member of the Collegium of the National Council for the Study of the Securitate Archives. And since 2005, he's a member of the Romanian delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Between 2010 and 2012, he was director of department in the Institute for the Investigation of the Communist Crimes and the Memory of the Romanian Exile. And he edited in collaboration a massive 8-volume discourse on anti-Semitic violence in modern Romania, which was published in 2020. He was also consulting for several movies and theater plays, and together with Radu Jude, he worked on the Exit of the Train. And Radu Jude, welcome, a film director and screenwriter, graduated from the film directing department of the Media University in Bucharest, and started working in film as assistant director to Costa Gavras and Cristi Puiu, and have produced, directed both fiction and non-fiction films. Among the latest fiction ones are Aferim, I Don't Care If We Go Down in History as Barbarians, and most recently Uppercase Print, which together with the Exit of the Trains premiered at Berlinale earlier this year. Multiple award winner, and also a person who already touched on the use of photographic archive in documentary with his earlier documentary film, The Dead Nation. So welcome, Radu. And it's also a great pleasure to introduce Sandra Behrens, the director of They Call Me Babu, for whom it's also a directorial debut. But Sandra is a script editor and creative producer and writer and director who works for Dutch broadcaster NTR. Also has a production company and worked as script editor for Cowboy and In Blue, and also a scriptwriter for Arigato, completed in 2012. and they called me Babu, I think is a very fitting addition to our today's discussion, even though formally it is not part of the Archive of the Planet section, but it's a film that is fully made of archival footage. It's part of the international competition, and I'm very happy that Sandra joined this panel discussion. Welcome. And last but not least, Adrian Giovlink, director of Master, and Tatiana, a film director and producer from Lithuania, who graduated with an MA in visual arts from the Vilnius Art Academy in 2007. Her earlier feature documentary, How We Played the Revolution, was also part of Versio a few years ago. Feels like days. A few years ago, we also won multiple awards internationally. And Master in Tatiana was completed in 2014. It's an earlier film. It won 4 national cinema awards, including the award for the best directing. But since then, Gievda already was working on multiple other projects. And her latest documentary completed this year, The Jump, is now on festival tour, was most recently screened in Rome and in Tallinn. So we show Master and Tatiana in the archival section because, as you will see, it is very appropriate here. And Gievda also a member of student debut and competition jury at Versio. So welcome Gievda, welcome everybody. We are about to plunge into the discussion, and we'll take rounds as I will be addressing you and your films individually and presenting them also to the audiences. But before, I would like to very briefly touch upon the very idea of the panel titled Archive Effect. This concept is taken from Jamie Barham writings, who was very actively exploring the effect of the found footage and found material in documentary cinema. And she argues that the use of the archival material creates a special spectatorial effect. So it's not just a sheer fact that the material is physically located in the archives and is taken by the director and inserted into the films, but there is a special archival effect which emerges when we have the so-called found footage material that is used by the director to create new meanings within her or his films. And I would like to first pose a question, a general question to everybody as to whether you as filmmakers agree that there is any kind of archival effect, or what is an archive effect for you. You use very different types of archival materials. Some of you work with moving images, some still images, some of them are from official national archives, some of them are from private holdings. So what is the archive effect for you? We'll start with brief answers and then we'll go individually film by film. So, any volunteers to start? Susanna, what would you say? What is the archive effect for you?
The archive effect. Well, just like you could argue documentary is real, maybe it's real within the documentary section. It has something very, I mean, I would say in my case it's personal archive that I use in the film. So there's no historical archive in the story, though it touches upon historical events, but it follows my own family. I follow a trauma, in a sense, that happened two generations back in my family. Maybe we'll talk about later about how I use the archive, but in general, I would say you can spectate it in a different way. You can look at it. Maybe that's a quality that it has, other than the here and now. I don't know. I think I will leave it up to you too. That's just on the top of my head, I would say, yeah.
Thank you. Radu, what would you say? You have worked a lot with different types of archives, with photographic archives, with studio archives.
Oh, well, I think that it's a very, very complicated matter, and not only the archive effect, which I also know from the book, the book you mentioned of Jamie Barron, but the fact that using documents, using archives of any kind, using all these things, not only so-called found footage film or archive footage film, but even in sometime in plain documentaries, TV documentaries, give a feeling of truth, a feeling of historical truth, because any document, any even if it's 1 day older or 100 years or 500 years older, it speaks about the past. It's something that came to us from the past. And I would make a montage, if you want, to another book, which is the book of Natalie Zemon Davis, which is called uh, Fiction in the Archive, Fiction in Documents, I think. Fiction and fiction in archive documents, precisely. And it's a wonderful book of a historian, where you can see how much we rely when reconstructing the past on documents, seeing them as, as being representing within their limits of representation, but representing a truth regarding something. And of course, there's always a part of fiction into that. And if I go to the document, to the archive, film archive in close to Bucharest, which is actually quite in a terrible state. If you look at the documentary section, you find all kind of propaganda films from the fascist times, for the communist dictatorship, and so on. And for me, they are fiction. They are not. They are not. Yeah, they are not documents. They are not documentary films. And of course, all these things get so mixed up that this archive effect is something that it's of course crucial and very important to the films we do, but also is the one that should be always kept at a distance and kept putting some question marks on it all the time.
Thank you. I think this is a very important point that you make, that the authenticating effect is at the same time going hand in hand with the possibility of actually reinterpreting it from multiple perspectives, and thus creating very different filmic narratives and very different messages as well. Sandra, what would you add to this very preliminary round of discussion?
Yeah, well, I think it's important what you also said before, Radu, that well, I was starting with archive because I was trying to it, for me it was a source, like the research, what is there. But I think I was always very aware of who made this and for what purpose. So about this, I also have seen a lot of propaganda films. But the thing is, when you just look at it silently, without the music and without the commentary, then you can see at the faces what is really going on in a way. Like in my film, there is one moment, there is the Japanese occupation in the former colony Dutch Indonesia, and there were a lot of Japanese propaganda films. And then you see some Indonesian girls in a school, and they were singing Japanese songs. And the commentary is, see, all the Indonesian people are very happy that we're here, and they're singing our songs, and they're, this is great, and they're part of the great Asian empire. And when I put it all away and I looked clearly at their faces, you see they were singing like, with such sad eyes, and just, you can sing and say all the words, but you can see it was not with their heart. So if I put that away, and in my film, I had chosen for the perspective of a young Indonesian girl. And so when I have her voice under this, then she looked in a total other way at it. And of course, you always have to be aware of what you're doing. But I think the thing is that there's always a lot of truths next to each other. And so, you know, in the case of, I had a lot of family films, like home movies, and I was aware that were from the Dutch people who were at the colony, they were the boss in that time. And most of the time, there were white fathers of the Dutch household who is filming. So it says something about his perspective. And I was starting there because I was looking for the nannies, for the baboes. And I knew that in those times, all the Dutch families with kids had a baboe. So the strange thing was that there were hundreds of films, but, well, almost on no film, there was a baboe scene. And there were kids. And then I saw something in the back, and I know they must be there. And when I look at it very close, then I saw somebody in the back. So that says me something about, okay, so they're in the center of the family in that time. But for the father who is filming, she's not that important. So it also gives me a lot of information about that time.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I think it's very important what you're talking about. And this is what also Tom Gunning was calling mimetic surplus, I guess, so that there's always more in the image that we can tease out depending on the optics that we apply to the material. Adrian, how it is for a historian who used to work in the archive, but with documents and with a different eye when this material makes it into a film? What changes then?
Well, living in Eastern Europe, we can feel after the 1989 revolution, this fascination for archives. So everybody had the impression that after so many years of secrecy, of censorship, we expected like a lot of revelations and a sort of national revival by accessing archives. So right now we have to deal with these huge expectations, and keeping in mind that the archives we were fascinated about, most of them were produced by dictatorial regimes. More than 51 years of dictatorship in Romania. So we have to combine huge expectations with a lot of precaution. And this is not easy, because this raises false and distorted expectations towards documentary movies included. So when we answered the questions about this film or about some of Radu's previous films, we were asked questions which show an expectation related to a sort of a pedagogical work. So people expect the truth exposed in a very pedagogical and didactical way. So we have to deal with, sometimes people wait for a sort of reversed propaganda film from documentaries. And it is quite difficult to make documentaries with a different language which reread the images and the documents. In our case, in the Exit of the Trains, the research you will see in the film is not collected from published books from a previous research. So all the research was made for the film, because we were very cautious towards written books and the meta narrative which is in use right now towards certain historical events.
Thank you very much. Yes, there is, of course, this danger and temptation to just take the archival word for a very transparent and instant truth. And I think once we get deeper into the films, we will see how much more complicated things are. And Giedre, you also worked with...
And I have to say that the first archive I saw was the Open Society archive in Budapest in 2000. So this is the first one, because the state archives were still difficult to access at that time, and that was like an example of open place which was accessible for young researchers interested in the history of communism and so on.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. And the archive is still there, and looks forward to new generations of researchers, and also to welcoming back those who have already been here with new projects. Giedre, you also worked with very private, but at the same time very public collection for your film. So in a way, kind of completing the circle between private and public. What is your take on the archive effect? You use a lot in many of your films, the archival footage.
Yes, and I agree with many of you with your thoughts on your thoughts before that you told, especially on this propagandic aspect of the archive. But at the same time, for me, it's extremely interesting. Working with archive material, it's like opening the other world, like the epochs that already passed away, and even the propagandic archives, you still recognize this the way how they're representing society, and still you can find something true, like clothes, like how people were dressing each other, how the streets look like. So you can even sometimes think you can feel the smell of of that time or that city. So here I feel really myself personally very enthusiastic, and I feel very interested in working with archive material. But of course, at the same time, I feel all these challenges that it's bringing. And first, and I always look at the archive not as an illustration, but as a creating meaning and looking in continuity while I'm editing the film, that it could fit the same, that it could fit, the style, the mood, and trying to get away from, trying to escape all these dangers of propagandic images. Even if for example, I need some image from 70s, and I find in the state archive, like, oh, nice fontaine, a street, looks like nothing is propagandic. But I feel that framing is already propagandic. The colors that they're using, like very bright colors, like of bright Soviet society, you realize it's also creates this propagandic, it has this glimpse of that time. So therefore, I really, if I don't want to show it as a propagandic archive, I better go and search for the private and try to find like 16 millimeters, 8 millimeters. That's always my first goal, just to try to find as much as possible from the private collections. And here I would like also to share one example. In my first film, How We Played the Revolution, there was one scene where the Soviets attacked the press house. And I had exactly the same scene filmed by film. It was not a propagandic anymore. It was already from Lithuanian studio, but still they were filming on a film from a tripod with a very clear, beautiful composition, black and white, contrast lighting, and it looked really very beautiful, but it looked like fiction. And I had the same scene shot from VHS material by some amateur filmmaker. And this image, this same scene from his camera looked much more emotional, much more true, and much more dangerous. So even though I knew that I could have like the best, because film was supposed to be shown on a big screen, but I knew that I can have like a good quality material, super scan, like, from 35 millimeters film. On the purpose, I chose the scene from a bad VHS material because I felt there was much emotion and truth in that. So that's what I could call archive effect. It's also
Thank you, Giedre. I think this is also a very important moment, the emotional impact which the archives have, and there especially the private archive enhance the emotional impact on us as the audiences. So with this first reactions, let's now try to delve deeper into your individual films, and I suggest we start with Susanna's It Takes a Family, completing going on to the second round. And Susanna already briefly introduced the film. It's about a very personal story, very difficult traumatic history, 3 generations explored through the family archives, using the photographs and also the home video. And I suggest we start with a short clip from your film and then follow up with more questions and comments from me and comments from you. So can we have the first clip, It Takes a Family?
Min farmor har altid sagt, at man ikke kan beskrive koncentrationslejrene. Mere vil hun ikke fortælle. Alligevel er det som om krigen aldrig er sluttet i min familie, og at min farmors liv også har påvirket mit. Det har berørt os alle sammen. Men vi har aldrig talt om, hvordan.
Jeg skal bare lige lave en hurtig test. Det er meningen, man ikke siger noget.
Susanne, jeg tror, det er bedre for den anden side, sådan som jeg kender mig selv.
Okay, så det er den anden er din gode side?
Vi er alle vævet ind i hinandens skæbne som familie og forbundet. Men nu har jeg besluttet mig for, at vi skal tale sammen. For det er tid til at afslutte fortiden og kigge frem.
Hej, Susanne.
Hej, farmor. Hej.
Hej. Vil du komme ud og besøge mig?
Yes. So Susanna, you are telling us the family story, talking a lot with your grandmother, whom you have just introduced already in the opening scene, and also your father. Your father's parents are both Holocaust survivors who later have moved to Denmark and settled there. But the experience, the very traumatic experience of the Second World War had long impact on the generations that followed. And there is this underlying trauma and generational tension, which was enhanced also by your father's choice to marry a German woman, your mother, and to whom your grandmother remained hostile. And I think she demanded one of the most severe sacrifices one can possibly demand from your mother. She said that she asked her not to speak her native language, not to speak German with her child. And then we are following through the conversations that you have with different family members. And what I wanted to ask you, first of all, I would like to invite everyone to watch the film in full and also pose your own questions. But what I would like to ask from you right now is, when you started thinking about this as a film and started looking into your family collections of photographs and also home videos, I presume they were familiar to you to some extent. But was there a moment when you started looking at these materials with a new eye in the process of the making of this film project?
Yes. So, you know, like many other families, of course, there are boxes with photos in our. So my film is made of family archive, so it's all private archive. And at a quite early stage, I decided I don't want to use other archive. I'm going to use the personal archive. There was quite a rich archive. My father had filmed Super 8, I remember it from when I was a little girl. We would sometimes watch these, like on a movie night, or we would sit and watch these clips. And so there was a lot of archive that I was, of course, aware of, that I knew, that I maybe even had a relationship with, that made me feel in a certain way. But there was also a lot of archive that came from my grandparents, and that was actually first later on, when at a later stage, that I discovered photos that were often taken in like in scenes. You know, there's a wedding scene in the film. You've seen the film, Oksana. Maybe I won't reveal too much, but the feeling was, and so there are sort of, you could say, I mean, it's a first person story, way of storytelling. So I'm telling the story, and I'm using a camera as well, and it also has a personal archive feel to it, or the quality of the way I'm filming it is sort of investigating my own grandmother and my father's feelings and trying to get closer to them with the camera. So there's also a sort of archiving something for myself that could later on be an archive in the process of filming, you could say. So there are these family archives from 3 generations. There's my own way of archiving and understanding where we are right now, because it's very much a story about, it's a story that that is about the past, of course, but it's more about how the past affects us today. So in the archive, we have, every generation has added a layer to the story in a way. So there's my father's Super 8, and there's my grandparents' still photos, of course. And there's my own layer to it as well. But yeah, when did I first, I mean, of course, because it's a film that contains, it's, you know, it's very much, it very much lives from the archive as well, this story. I think I couldn't tell it this way without the archive. The montaging part, the feeling, you know, I wanted to also to create, you know, to use the archive to talk about the trauma. So how it sort of translates from one generation to another, and how it's, you know, how we can move in time, and how, you know, we can see an image of me as a small child, and then it goes into a still, because sometimes I would have both film and still of the same scene. So I tried to play with these qualities to also, you know, as a spectator, you get a sense of, okay, you're part of this family now, and you're invited into this family, and this, you know, it could also be your own family story, or it has very much a private or personal quality, I would say. What do you think? I don't know.
So when you were going through the archive materials and thinking about how to build it into the film, was there something? Were there any materials when you were thinking that no, that possibly cannot be included? Not because of the structure of the film, because logically not everything can be included, but because it would be too much or too personal, or other family members would not be happy without it.
I don't know. I have to think about that question. I think it you know, I mean, the whole idea, I think, is also because I think what happens with personal archive is, I mean, it's often people, if it's a party or something, they smile, or they, you know, you do something, you try to please the camera, or so there's also this, like Sandra, you also mentioned that, you know, things can be true and they can be not true. So I think there's always this thing that you can, if you take a longer or closer look at something, you will see more, or you will see, you will see it in a different way. And I think because the story is very much also about me trying to get closer to my grandmother, because of course the horrific things that she endured and experienced firsthand had an immense effect on her. And you know, to me, there was also always sort of a feeling that her eyes or her view, the way she looked at me was not so smiling as maybe in the pictures. So in the pictures, she's smiling much more than she actually is. But so, you know, so like looking at the pictures, the gaze and like, you know, so also for me, there was a feeling that, you know, there was both a therapeutical feeling when I edited the film. You see, okay, you know, it's not just tragic. There's also happiness. It's, you know, it's a story about trauma, but no family is always unhappy. It's just not humanly possible to be sad 24/7. It's nobody is like this. So even if there's, you know, a big elephant in the room and there's some difficulties, there are also happy times. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but
yes,
you know,
I think this is very important. The performative aspect of this home recordings, that in a way they are there to commemorate happy moments, and of course, as the members of this very close community, we know what's behind it, and we know what's more there to it. And I think your film is putting this together very strongly, using the happy moments, and also using the interviews and using the personal commentaries to go beyond the surface.
Yes, but also because, you know, of this feeling, you know, how you look at things. You know, do you see the glass half full or half empty? You know, you can say, oh, my life was hard and it's difficult, or you can feel empowered. And also, you know, when I also see my grandmother, I see a beautiful woman, I see a strong woman. So it's also about the interpretation and how I, you know, yeah, how I interpret these images. So and they are sort of dynamic, so you can revisit them, and sometimes you will see and you will feel, okay, she was looking angry at me, and then if you look in a different way with different glasses, you will see, no, she wasn't, you know. So, and I think this is something that that I want to, you know, yeah, have people look at. Yeah.
So when you were telling your family story, your mother, your grandmother, and your father are getting the most attention from you and the most screen time from you, and your mother is a bit in the background, and her family history is also much less unpacked. Was it an original decision to leave it in a way much more closed? At one moment we see a box from where the documents and the family photographs are emerging, and the story of the family members participating in the Wehrmacht army in the Second World War are mentioned, but you go much less in that direction. How did you decide to go for that balance or unbalanced in the story?
Yes, I mean, I guess it all plays together, but I think it's because initially, or the impulse when I started was, you know, I wanted to sort of you know, to reach my grandmother and to be closer with her, and so that was the goal. That was sort of I had some questions. I had, you know, her life had in a way influenced not only her but also her son, and in a lesser way had also had an effect on me, or at least our relationship. So our relationship was sort of colored by her experiences and also by historical events. So I always felt like it stood in the way that my mother is German and she had endured these things in the Holocaust, and that was sort of the offset for me. So, and of course, when I tell about my grandparent, they're from Hungary, so my Hungarian grandmother's life story, I also have to include my other grandparents, I felt, because, or, in some way to explain also how difficult it must have been for my grandmother. And yeah, but there's this tension, of course, of the victims and the perpetrators. I mean, there were many thoughts about this as well, because of course, I'm a grandchild on both sides, so I could have explored that deeper as well. But it was where I personally felt more conflict and more questions, so that it drew me in that direction. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me involve Sandra also into this discussion, because you also worked a lot with the amateur archives, amateur recordings rather than archives. And you put together in They Call Me Bapu a kind of mosaic experience of multiple Indonesian women's stories that are weaved together, synthesized in this assembled character that you create, Alima, who is also addressed as Babu. You already introduced it a little bit to us, answering the first question about the archive effect. But so basically it's her story, this imaginary character story, which is fully put together from archival footage. We follow her from her early years, still in the colonial period, all the way up to the Indonesian independence, into the post World War II years. And let's start with watching a short clip from your film, and then I'll
can be really. And is there also sound? Because I didn't hear any.
There is a sound for the audience who watches it on stream, but unfortunately, since we are in a different program, we can only follow the image.
Okay.
But the audience enjoys it fully. So let's watch a clip from They Call Me Babu.
Aku kangen ibu. Aku kangen punggung bukumu dekat aku. Harum manis keringatmu campur bau lumpur. Elok tanganmu keriput karena kerja di sawah basah. Aku kangen kata-kata ibu yang arif, nyanyian, cerita-cerita ibu, suara ibu yang lembut, penuh sayang sebut namaku, Alima.
Great images, right?
Wonderful images.
Always regret that Romania wasn't a colonial empire, so we could have these images ourselves.
I don't know. Sandra, yes. Did you ask a question before or not?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
No. I'm just about to ask you. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with the archive? So what came first? First, you had the story and you started looking for materials, or first you saw some visuals that really kind of inspired you, and then from assembling the visuals, you created a story?
Well, one thing influenced the other. It started with stories of my mom about her nanny. She lived in Indonesia. She's half Indonesian. I'm also half Indonesian. So I also reflect on your story, Susanne, that you're in the middle of. So, you're kind of between two cultures and between two loyalties. So that was why I was really attached to the story of the Babu, because she was from Indonesian background, but in the time this story is, a lot of them worked for the Dutch families. And in this case, she's all alone. It started with her mom that died. And so she feels really attached also to her Dutch family. And she has to take care of a little baby. And it felt like that is her baby in a way. But so it started with stories of my mom, and then other people from Dutch kinship that were all raised by Indonesian Babus. And because of the history, then there was the Japanese occupation, and all the Dutch families goes into the camps for like 3 years. So from one moment to the other, the kids just are separated from their kind of mothers. They have their own mother, but these nannies felt like sometimes their first mothers. And so I heard a lot of stories, and I thought, what's strange is it that I don't see anything in our history. There's nothing written in our books, in our history books, and there are almost no film or roman about it. So that was why I was very curious about looking what is with these nannies. And I knew that from the Dutch kids that they really, when they were adults, they want to go and find their babus. But the sad thing is that they only know their name as Babu, like, you know, Mama. So they don't know where to look. And in Indonesia, nobody was registered in a good way. So it felt like, you know, they're big guys. And the moment they were talking about their nannies, about their Babus, they were just crying. So I started with a lot of stories here, but also with former Babus in Indonesia, but also former Babus in the Netherlands, because as you can see in the film, the Dutch people worked there for like 6 years. And then the 7th years, they have like for a year holiday to go back to their family. And most of the times they took their nanny with them because she was part of the family. And the moment the World War II started in the Netherlands in 1940, nobody could go back. So they started their home here in the Netherlands. So I could also interview a lot of people here that stayed in the Netherlands, and their children and grandchildren. So I had a lot of stories, but as I mentioned before, the archives gives me also stories. Especially, you know, it started now in the rice fields. And what I said before, that I wanted to know who made this and for what purpose. When you see these wonderful images of all the ladies working in the rice fields, and then these volcanoes in the back, you look like, this is quite alive, you know, in the sun, a little bit, plucking some rice and talking with the other girls. It looks very romantic and wonderful. But so I did a lot of research about how was it for these people working in the rice. And the thing was that all these women working there, they were not paid, because there is a culture in Indonesia, it's called the adat, that women were not really working, they're just helping their family. So that was very nice for the Dutch people. So they don't have to pay them because they're not really workers, as the children are not really workers. So they just get a little bit of rice. And you have to imagine that they have to work day on, day off, just low down and pick, and in this muddy, humid ground. So I used this image, but I also said to my sound designer, I can't tell everything I know, but I want that in the sound design that you feel that it's muddy and it's humid and it's, you know, it's strong work. So I put a lot of information around this archive material in the story. yeah, I can talk for hours, but maybe this is a little.
Let me just ask you maybe to give us a little bit more information about the actual material that you found. So where have you started to look? You credit iInstitute as
Yes.
the source of the information. What kind of collections? You mentioned that some of them were these Dutch colonial families that were filming for themselves. So how many families altogether? How many families' collections altogether are deposited with I? So what was the basis from where you were collecting? And you also mentioned that you had the Japanese horror films included into your film. So please give us some range of materials that went into
Yeah,
the
well,
film.
we have, in the Netherlands, we have two big archives. We have I, and we have sound and sound and image, and I use both. And I was especially, they had a big archive of home movies, and that's where I started because I was really looking for images of baboes, and that was very, very difficult. And I will park it for then. And so from the moment the Japanese occupied Dutch Indonesia, there were no more home movies because they were in the camps. So from that moment on, the most archive material I found at Sound and Design, because, and there were a lot of propaganda films in it, but it was like after the Japanese have their capitulation in 1945, the Dutch people, the Dutch soldiers, they take all the propaganda films from Japan, most of it, and took it as a war thing to the Netherlands. And that is kept in Sound and Design. So that is one of the and I had all kind, and in I and in Sound and Design as well. So we have home movies, we have propaganda movies from Japanese side. I also have used material from the Japanese archive. But you have also anthropological archives that really looked into, so this is Indonesia, and this is how they make pots, and this is, they have their wayang, and all kind of things like that. But also it was really kind of touristic films, like this is Indonesia, and you can eat here as much as you like. And so I have some images about one big fat Dutch guy sitting with a plane before him, and like a row of 12 servants with all kind of food, and he's just taking and growing and growing. And but it was just meant like, this is good life, this is paradise. And when I looked at it, I think for the second or third time, I just saw that in this row of servants, male servants, that when I look in detail, I saw that, they were very ashamed of standing there. So they tried to look away, as it was not possible because, they have to be filmed and they're in the row, they couldn't hide. But the Japanese people, it was mostly filmed in Java, they were very proud people. So they're in this position, and they couldn't do anything, but they were just looking away or down. And so for me, I just used it in another way, like to see this colonial abuse. So there was a lot of in every film, and for me it was because I saw like 500 films, and I all described them, and I didn't know what I was looking for in the beginning. Yeah, I wanted to make kind of story about the nannies, and I want to get them out of the shadow because nobody knows about them. But I was not really sure what I was looking for. So everything that I like, I just wrote it. So there was a factory film of kapok. And kapok is, it looks like snow, but it is a plant, it's used to make mattresses and pillows. And there was this image of, you see only snow, just swirling white things. And then suddenly you see all these women that just do their work in the kapok. And the first image I saw of a baboe in the archives of I, and it was with the one who was taking care of the archives, and she had seen it before, but I knew there must be something. So I go with her, and so she put it on the film table, and then we saw, no, nothing. And then in the last 30 seconds, suddenly there was this babu in the garden, in a Dutch garden, holding her hands and just looking up like, wow, this is something. And that was snow. And I heard before a story about Indonesian babus telling to each other, you know, there must be something in the Netherlands, in the country of our bosses. They call it the magic sand, and it's going just from the heaven and going down. So then I thought, okay, I don't know how, but it has to mirror in some way the kapok and the snow. So yeah, I was like a sponge. I was interested in everything. And when I was working on it, I wrote the voiceover on the images. And then when I was in the sound design, I have to cut it. Also because I translated in Indonesian, the language that was told in that time, not the Bahasa Indonesia, but the kind of street language in that time. And they don't use adverbs. So when I don't want to have a film with voiceover all the time. So I try to cut it down as possible. So then you use a lot of, so there's Chinese, old, ugly man. But in Indonesia, you can't say this. So they say there is a man. He's Chinese, he's old, he's ugly. So then you have 5 sentences. So I need to do, in every stage, I was like editing and shaping the voiceover and shaping the stories and shaping the images. And there was even, when I had like Q&As and screenings, there was a man, and he said to me, okay, so you said it's 100% archive. I know it's not true. So tell me, what did you film yourself? And I didn't. You know, it was like sometimes it's wonderful, the archive, like Gudrun said, it's just, you know, like Alice in Wonderland, and wow, you know, you see so many wonderful things. But if you make a story with it, a film with it, it's also that you like, oh, it's just 10 seconds, I need 15. So I said, well, it was hard work to, you know, I had to do with what it was. And
yes,
he didn't,
certainly the images that you have mentioned, the scenes with the kapok factory, and also the scenes in Amsterdam, they're very poetic, and I think you're teasing out something extra that was maybe not there in the original material. So it's a very poetic film, but it's also a very political film at the same time, because you're telling the story, you know, giving the voice to the unheard and invisible, and telling a story of a liberation in a way. So a liberation of a country, and a liberation of a main character, your main character, who then gets educated and becomes a teacher herself, educating the new generations. And we end with the independent Indonesia, which is this kind of progressivist narrative. And the main film that I can think of related to the film and Indonesian independence is, of course, this classic of Dutch cinema, Joris Ivens, who made a film on Indonesian independence. I'm sure you probably had it somewhere in the back of your mind as a kind of alternative narrative. It's a film that was commissioned and supported by Australia and not by the Dutch government. But I'm sure these images were familiar to you. You're putting forward a very different narrative of an empowered female. But I was wondering, and I know that we can talk much more, but we still have two films to discuss. So this would be it for this round. But if you could tell us if you had in mind also using, if that was possible to use some of the Ivens footage, or rethink his narrative in some way. Is your film is in some way in dialogue with Indonesia?
Well, I did see that image, but before I forget it, I have to say that I was more inspired by an Hungarian guy, Peter Forgas, who also make a lot of movies with archive material. And the film of yours, Evans, is much more, it's very a political film, and it's really about the moments that after, for you guys, after Japanese capitulation, the Indonesian guys said, okay, now it's our turn, you know, we are independent. And the Dutch people said, no, you know, you can't do that, and it's still ours. But there were no Dutch people there because they're all in the camp. So there was a kind of, in between. And then the people from the soldiers from Indonesia, from the Netherlands, they wanted to come through Australia and then go to Indonesia. But the Australian people said, no, you know, the Indonesian people are our friends, so we will stop it. So that was a film really about stopping and being solidar with the Indonesian people.
And also a very male story.
Yeah.
So there we don't have any single female that would be in any way part of that narrative. So in a way, I think your film resonates by a reversal of Evans' narrative in some way.
And people say to me, so you want to restructure the history? And I said, no, I don't want to restructure. I want to add something, because the things that I've seen, they were only made by white men and about white men. And I think this is a story, you know, it's also a story. And I don't think history is always one story, but this is from the perspective of the Indonesian side and from a young woman without no power in a time when there was a big power play and it's all around, you know, above her head. And I was really focusing on the human stories, about the human relationships, about, you know, a kind of mother and a kind of child, and, you know, trying to find a human way of living within this power play, with other people saying, okay, now you have to look like that side, and now you have to bow like this side, and when you don't do it, then you're wrong. And I tried, I think in a way, of course, I have also my opinion, but I tried to, in this history, not to give judgments, but I really want people to ask questions about the history instead of, it is like this.
Thank you, Sandra. Radu and Adrian, you're also addressing a story which is not in the mainstream, and I think you're also teasing out a lot of very traumatic and suppressed moments that are missing from the national history with your film Exit of the Trains, which is put together fully from still images, and it's a story of deportation and murders in the Romanian town of Iași. In 1941, it records the individual stories one after another using portrait photographs, identifying every single person, every single name is given there. And it's also a film of a very demanding length. It's 175 minutes, so that every name counts and every voice is heard. Let's start with a short clip, and then I would like to ask you to a little bit tell us about the process of making this film. So let's watch Exit of the Trains clip.
În baza actelor depuse de petiționară și în urma investigațiilor noastre, certificăm că Bartfel Ioil, fiul petiționarei, a decedat în următoarele împrejurări. Asasinat prin asfixiere în trenul cu care au fost evacuați evrei din Iași spre podul Iloaiei în ziua de 30 iunie 1941.
Soțul meu, Baumel Littman, a fost ridicat de acasă, dus la Chestura Iași, îmbarcat în trenul morții și asfixiat la podul Iloaie, județul Iași, unde a fost înmormântat. Soțul meu, Belțer Ițic, a fost scos din casă în ziua de 29 iunie 1941, dus în convoi la Chestura Poliției Iași și acolo crunt bătut și apoi împușcat mortal în curtea Chesturei.
Primul glonț a lovit pe fetița mea, Bela Felix, în piciorul drept. Fetița avea vârsta de 18 ani. Eu am sărit în ajutorul fetiței și în acel moment am primit un glonț în brațul drept, din care cauza am rămas infirmă de brațul drept. Soțul meu a fost ridicat din adăpost împreună cu băiatul meu, Alfred Felix, în vârstă de 15 ani, și duși la Chestură, de unde au fost îmbarcați în trenul morții și porniți pe o destinație necunoscută. Am fost informată că copilul meu a murit în brațele tatălui său a doua zi și soțul a murit a doua zi după pierderea copilului.
So Radu and Adrian, could you please tell us a little bit about how you collaborated on this research and how you went after the materials? One can sense immense research work that went into it. And Adrian already mentioned that you could not rely on any pre-existing collections or archival research. You had to do it yourself. What was first, the research that then turned into film, or the film idea that generated the research, and how did you found each other, how you cooperated?
Well, then I will start and let Adrian complete, because I think, and I said it also previously, and I will repeatedly say it. I'm sorry, it's an example of a film really made out of a collaboration. I'm not a historian. Adrian is a historian. He was the consultant for one of my previous film. I do not care if we go down in History of Barbarians, which is a film with actors, but addressing also the involvement of Romania in the massacres on the Eastern Front, of the Romanian army and authorities. And so he's a historian, I'm a filmmaker, and I think it is a film that we couldn't do but only together, because maybe he couldn't know how to structure exactly everything that he had, and I wouldn't know how to find and interpret, but first of all to work on finding the big mass of archives that he found. And as I said, I let him talk about that. Actually, we started by collaborating, as I said, with Adrian as a consultant. At some point, I had the idea, because he told me about this archive, to complete it as a kind of a short film, maybe 10 or 20 minutes. I had an idea to make a film comprised of some more short things that I was doing involving archives. And he said, well, I'm not sure it's for a short film. And then I went to him, and the first one, to his office, the first thing I wanted to say to him was, look, I'm not going to make another film with photographs, because I've made one, and I don't think I want to explore again the involvement of Romania in the Holocaust, because I did it in 2 films. But in the moment I saw, he presented me the archive, which is, I think, hundreds of thousands of copies of digital copies of files and of these photographs that he found, and the way he matched them. I said, well, we have to do the film, we have to do it together, because it's your idea. It was his idea to make this film together, and I couldn't refuse, because first of all was the seriousness, the fact that was such a serious work in finding all these forgotten documents and forgotten photographs. And also because there is something I think very important what he did, and this is, although he's a historian, I think this is a cinema thinking applied to history, because I think here maybe as Godard is doing that, you can find cinema as a thinking process in every other human thinking disciplines, like in history or literature or painting or mathematics or whatever. There's a kind of using montage or using putting together elements, which is something very cinematic, and you can find it in other places. Because what Adrian did was to find, after he found an album with photographs of the people who were eventually killed in the Iași massacre, Iași pogrom in 1941, he tried to find their story, to find their text in the other documents, to match them together. And when I saw that, I said, "But Adrian, this is the film that you made here. This is the idea of the film, and we don't need something else." And now I let Adrian tell more about that.
Well, Oksana, you're right. The Iași pogrom, that was the first mass killing perpetrated after the onset of the Barbarossa operation in 1941, is quite notorious in Romania, but not that well known. And of course, this is not included yet in the curricula in a very serious way, and not included in the national narrative. So when we tell stories about us, usually we don't include this episode. So in archives right now are accessible tens and tens of thousands of documents, and there is this discrepancy between what is publicly known about this mass killing, and which is very little, and what is available as information in the archives, which is huge. And it takes time to process. I've worked for this database for 10 years, and I use digitized and processed material, which is indexed, processed with OCR and different other methods. And we were able to attach stories to photos, because the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, had several photos of victims of the Iași pogrom, but no biography attached to the victim. And that was striking for two different so serious research institutions. And we started to put together things. And the main piece, as Radu said, was this album, which we bought from eBay with around 300 portraits, but only portraits and names. And we used the database to find out the story of the life and the death of those people. And sometimes some of the stories are not known even by their families, by the families of those who were killed. So this is a very emotional process, very difficult, and we don't know the impact yet. We wanted to present the film in Israel, where most of the survivors and family of the survivors live, and also to audiences in Romania. But we hope the times will get normal again, and we'll see the impact in the families of the survivors.
This is an amazingly deep and extensive research that went into this, and the film is also very demanding. And I should tell to our audience that the film is structured in two parts, and the first part are the statements and testimonies, where we hear the stories told by the family members about the people who died in the pogroms or were deported and were killed or died on the way. And there is part two, which is only last 15 minutes of the film, which is called images. And that part, if in the first part we see portraits coming from very different sources. Sometimes there are studio portraits from the family collection. Sometimes they are press photos or published photos or photos from the documents. A lot of them are bearing traces of kind of state imprint on them, stamps, postal stamps, or stamps, physical stamps on the images. They are accompanied by narration in the first part. And in the last 15 minutes out of 175-minute film, we see images done in this reportage style already about the pogrom and the deportation. There is not a single word of a commentary. But I think what the film is magically achieving for the viewer is actually watching the last 15 minutes of this very silent sequence of images, very brutal images. We hear the voices and we start guessing or start thinking about concrete stories behind the people who are nameless there in this image. And I would like to ask you to comment maybe a little bit on your thinking about that structure and also on the source of the images in the last 15 minutes, because it seems to be a very meticulous and detailed documentation of the murders, of the very brutal murders.
Well, actually, yes, it is a long film, and I think it is a challenging film, and it is a very radical film, using the word radical in its etymological meaning, going to the root, because it's composed only of fixed image, montage, and some text. So it's a very elementary film, so to speak. Some people could consider it just a bad how you call it, not a PDF, this
PowerPoint
presentations. And actually the first part, which is the longest part, and then the second part is the same film told twice in a way. It's the story of this massacre told the first without images of the actual massacre. You just see the faces of the people and their stories. So it's a depiction of this massacre with words mostly. And the second part is another representation of this massacre using the archive images, which are a lot, and I will and Adrian, I think, will let us know where they come from. And why is that? Actually, for two reasons. Not only for doing a kind of experiment in representation or politics of representations or possibilities of representations. And to be honest, we wanted, I think, the first idea was to make only the testimonies, so to make it only with the text without showing the actual atrocity photographs. And we all know that in the end we use that, and knowing perfectly well that it's a very complicated ethical question here. We all know Susan Sontag's book regarding the pain of others and all the unfinished and necessary discussions about showing horrors on screen or on other media. Is this helpful? Is this respectful towards the victim, because showing the moment of their death or their bodies, it's something that, as the DOP that we worked, my regular DOP who also helped us film these photographs, some of the photographs which were not scanned but filmed. He said, well, would you like to, when somebody's killing you, so another guy is making a photograph, and then some years after, a film director takes these photographs, make a film with it, and goes to Berlin Film Festival. This is absolutely ridiculous and horrifying perspective, of course. But in the end, actually, we kept it because, and we edited quite short in order not to become a show, not to become a spectacle, just to give the information, the visual information to the viewers, because we felt it is important, if you want, in my words, this is my take on it, for negationists, so to speak. There's such a big level of negation in Romania, and not only regarding regarding Holocaust, and not only Holocaust, but we are speaking about Holocaust here. There's so many people who are saying, well, it didn't happen, it wasn't exactly like that, it wasn't, and so on and so forth. So by showing these photographs, and it's like a proof that, well, the testimonies in the first part and the information that those documents are giving using text can be verified in the second part with photographs, with images. This is, well, the ethical problems still remain unsolved in my opinion. And what's more troubling, if you want, is the fact that, of course, we have those photographs as a solid medium. I mean, we have, Adrian has some negatives. In the archives, there are photographs, there are also other negatives, or are the paper photographs themselves. But when we turn everything into a digital file, like is nowadays, everything gets, from an ontological point of view, so to speak, much more complicated, because we know that a digital image, a digital photograph, a digital archive, if you want, is not the same thing as a physical archive. It's something where the fake can appear much easier, where the condition of production is different, where the existence of this image is questionable, because we all know it's just a 0 and 1 in a hard disk, and then this create an image. So where is the relationship between this computer image, digital image, with reality, as you have at least in a physical photograph, in a normal photograph, where you have a film stock and a camera lens, and the light from the objects came on that and makes a print on it, and you have it. So I don't have an answer to this, but I think these are the most important. I think the most important problem regarding archive nowadays, or document nowadays, is how can we think of the digital media. And Adrian, if you want to talk about other things.
Yeah, indeed, the second part is has a very strong effect, but only after you see it after the first part, because we try to avoid this panoramic view, a panoramic narrative, and also those images we used in the last part have this effect which provokes the anonymity of the victims. So if you see only corpses and victims without names, you don't get it. So we used them, and they are pretty well known in Romania, the photos from the second part. But we consider that they make sense after you hear the story of individuals. And keep in mind that we tell the stories of only 200 victims, although the film is very long. But we were able to find information about only 200 victims with photos. We had around 600 portraits out of, let's say, 10,000 victims of the Iași pogrom. And this is important because sometimes this is what remains out of a person. Sometimes one phrase, sometimes one bureaucratic formula, and sometimes nothing. So, of course, the film is long. It's painful to see it, but on the other side, watching it is reversing the status of looking, because after Susan Sontag and other books which complained about the utility of looking at the photos of atrocities, which looked like a shameful voyeuristic exercise, this type of effort to see the story of stories of some people is revigorating the status of looking. because it takes courage to hear and to see and to find out about so many atrocities, and it needs patience to find sometimes repetitive stories, but I think that this tension between the duration of the film, the fact that we tell actually not so many stories, in contradiction with the scale of the massacre. So this is part of the idea of the film.
Absolutely, and I think that the two of you put it together very strongly. So on the one hand, there is of course the authenticating effect of the images that are proving this kind of Barthian notion of having been there, right? This defect that happened and was recorded by the camera, but at the same time, it also makes us look at these images differently. And what Adrian also emphasized, that the first part is indeed extremely important for making a complete different perspective for the viewer towards the images. And you also use multiple other ways that problematize the viewing, the asynchrony, pauses, black screens. So it's a very complex reflection, I think, on the one hand, on a very concrete historical event, very tragic historical event, and on the other hand, indeed, on the very nature of representation of a dramatic historical event. So I think the film works very strongly on both levels. And it's certainly a very important and worthy effort that the viewer makes watching it through. So I would like to encourage everyone to use this possibility of watching the films on versio.org. And also now, as I'm moving to ask Giedre to tell us a little bit about her film, I would like to also encourage those who are watching it live to pose your questions, or if you are going to watch this later in the recording, you can ask directors in a video message all your questions using Dialog on the Versio page. And now onwards to Master and Tatiana and Giedre, who tells us a story of a talented photographer, one of the, I think, really stars of the 20th century photography, Vitas Luckus, and his love story with a tragic end. So there is a photographic archive that plays there a very important role on these different levels. He was a kind of professional photographer, and also his private life that is being reflected there. Let's watch a short clip from Master and Tatiana.
Fotografijų archyvai tai bedugnio šulinio veidrodis, kur mes tikimės, kad kas nors jį pažiūrėjęs mūsų supras. Maketuodamas albumą, požiūris į finalę fotografiją, jaučiu didelį pasitenkinimą. Aš matau žmogų kaip tokį, žmogų nepasikeitusį per tuos laikmečius, bent per tuos laikmečius, kol egzistuoja fotografija. Aš matau senovės fotografijose save, savo draugus, tais pačias aistras, meilę, neapykantą. Žiūrint senovės fotografijos archyvus, man žmonijos santykių painiava atrodo begalinė istorija. Bet kada aš susidėjau viską ant stalo, aš pasijutau Dievu. Pas mane šalia kaip indusas indėnas, juodaodis, baltaodis, musulmonas, budistas, krikščionis, kaizleris, karas, laidotuvės, vestuvės. Ir vieną dieną pasimetęs tarp savo jausmų pasaulio, daugmaž tvarkingai vieno mąstymo dienos produktą, reiškia, sumaišiau vieną krūvą. Dešimtis tūkstančių negatyvų nuotraukų kontroliai. Ir aš pamačiau, kad jie visi pas mane tvarkingame šiukšlyne. Ir prasme, mes visi kaip žmonės.
Thank you, Giedre, for bringing us this film. And what you have seen in this short clip, and what I have found especially fascinating, is this archive that Luckus creates from found images, from orphan images, and creates his own archive of the planet. And then later you see his own works also included into this fragment. And he speaks also, or he writes notes about his fascination with assembling the images that come from very diverse sources, and the power that it gives him to kind of see the world through these images. It's also a very strong reflection about the archives and what photographic image as a medium can do to reflect and store the world. And I would like to ask Giedre to tell us a little bit about how you worked with Luckus archive and how the process of making this film maybe changed the way you have seen his work and his life story. And you're muted now, so please unmute.
Okay, sorry.
Mike.
Maybe this specific clip do not reveal the style of the film completely, because this is a scene where it's monologue by my main character, and I had only, that was the only piece what I had about him. It was his voice. It was like his voice diary. What was he thinking about photography and about archive photography, because he was a wonderful photographer, and at the same time he was very fascinated with found footage. So he was collecting old photographs and doing the albums, as you've seen, like a books from that old photography. And this part of the film, the scene where the clip was now being shown, it was just because he was expressing his attitude. So I wanted just to screen like his own archives. So that's why maybe it looked. But talking about the whole movie, I had few challenges. So first of all, it was the story that already happened. So it was a past story. So how to tell about somebody who's already gone. And I didn't had just a very, like a 2 minutes image of him, which I used at the end of the film, and all the rest was photography. And when I finished the film, I heard that this movie is very emotional. So I was very happy that I managed to create emotion from still image, from photos, because film is something is moving, and I had the photography, still images. So I used a few methods. And I had like his photographs, like as an artist, and I had his photographs that were revealing his life and love story. So my method was as following. His photographs that were representing him as a photographer, I showed them like in a very respectful way, in a white background, and we were recreating a sound for this. So I wanted just to create this impression, because where you can see photography best, you will see it at the exhibition. Yeah, otherwise you are recropping, reframing, you're already creating your own meaning. So at some parts of the film where I wanted to present him of the work he created, I just used this respectful, my point of view. I was just showing not framing, not cropping, the whole picture, and recreated like a sound design for this. But to tell the story, to tell the emotional film of the story, I used his photographs, which I refilmed, which I used shadow. We really, there is no digital touch in all the film. All photography is refilmed. There is only one place, one scene in the film where I didn't refilm, and later in editing, I felt that I need these photographs. So later in post-production, we did like a camera tracking method to have a feeling that still it was refilmed with a camera, not to have this feeling of a digital touch. And I used a magnifying glass. It's not seen there, but you can see in the film trailer on the film itself if you will have time to watch it. Because I found so many contact sheets that could tell his life story. So we use the movement of camera and the magic of focus, the focus, light, opening, just like in a real cinema, just to create the beginning, panorama, the end of a certain scene. So my method was to keep the authenticity, the movement, the light as true and as cinematic as possible. And also I wanted to build the relationship between Tatiana, who was the holder of the archive, and the photography. So I wanted her to also to be inside the story and just to build. If you see watching photography, we had to see who is watching, and in that way creating this.
That's very important, because you have, of course, Tatiana also as your protagonist in the story, and we also see and in a way hear the story through her and by her. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit more whether you have first met Tatiana and through her got to know Luccu's photography, or you started with his archive or with his life story and with his published photographs, exhibited photographs, and then got in touch with Tatiana. And what was that process of getting her also on board of the film?
I started with these images that I saw his work, and I just couldn't fall asleep. It just very deeply imprinted in my. Really, it touched me so strongly. I was just going with these images, and of course, I knew the story behind. The story was tragic, powerful, sad, and inspiring at the same time. Inspiring. I mean, his work was inspiring. And Tatiana, she lived in the United States, and she still is living there, and all the archive was in the United States. So I had to reach her. So I wrote her an email, and that's how we started working together. We met after maybe half of a year or 1 year, and that's how we started digging into the archives. And I remember when we were in the States, and I found all these wonderful contact sheets. And like there is one scene where with editor we were joking that we were creating like a love scene from the photos, but really they both she and Vitas were making their selfies, and actually this verso discussion is using the frame from that scene. Yeah, it's still beautiful, you know, we were in the United States, we have limited time, and I'm just looking at these contact sheets, and they're very, you know, small, but I see it's so beautiful. We need to do something. And I really liked also that he marked something like circled some images that also creates, like, that can help me to tell the story and emphasize on certain aspects. And I say to my cinematographer, let's do this with these contacts. And he tells, it's impossible. I need different lenses, they're too small. And somehow at the end, I managed to convince him, okay, I did it in another way. I thought, okay, if you don't shoot, I will film myself because I like it. And he was watching how I was filming. He said, okay, I will think something. And he built a special construction from everything what he could find. Like all night he was building just to see a special construction where to put with contacts and photographs, and to have like a camera in a certain position and to have a light in a certain position, but he could keep the focus because we were so tiny contacts. And after he built this construction, I made even a photo. It looked like a big, when we started doing this, and I think that at the end the visual was very great, and he even won few awards just for picturing photographs. So we refilmed, we played with light, we played with a shadow. I was doing like with my hand like that, like you see the photograph, and we do like that to have this natural shadow opening and closing the picture. So there were a lot of experimentation, but what I found myself was very interesting, also how you edit, you work with the photograph. You can have like two very strong images, and then you put them next to each other, and they somehow start destroying each other. So that's also very interesting thing. You can use a strong image twice, and you always had to think what to edit before and after. Yeah, so
yeah.
that's
I think the contact sheets work very strongly in the film. But I also wanted to ask you that you're on the one hand tell a very personal story, but at the same time, it's not just a story of a great photographer or a story of a couple in their love story. It's also a story about late socialism and about possibility of creativity in late socialism, with its strange mix of repression, very controlled environment with censorship, but at the same time, this strange pockets of freedom and experiment and creativity, which is still there. And I wanted to ask you, and then we're in the rounding up part of our conversation, and I would like to talk a little bit about the reception. So let's start with Giedre, and please tell us, how do you see the film working with young audiences who do not have this first-hand experience with the society that you try to also give us an insight into through this story of a great photographer and his muse? How does it resonate, be it in Lithuania or in Eastern Europe more broadly? Is it resonating differently than it would be in the US, for example? Is it resonating differently with different generations as well?
Yeah, of course it's resonating, but still, if you're talking something like a love story, also for the freedom aspect, that somebody understand that he was not enough free to do what he wanted to do, and that's so there are some kind of universal things, and I can think it can resonate in everywhere, just the matter how you put them together in editing. And the matter of building the context, it's always a big challenge and headache while I'm working myself on the films. How to build a context, but not to make a film like as a history lesson. And I sometimes think that it's also that if we are dealing some films like that, we must be a little bit like poets, because we need to find like a very short something or scene or phrase or something very condensed that as in a metaphoric way could deliver for the audience who didn't experience the same, just with as much as possible understanding of the context and of the situation. So I think it should be not much, but it should be very much inside the meaning. No, like a poetry, like metaphor, in short, to tell bigger things. And if we are wrapping up, I also want to wrap up with one, because the members of panels, we didn't hear the sound of the clip, but of course I remember the sound by heart myself. And the monologue that my film character with the recorded voice, what was here. So first of all, it was also an archive. And I felt myself shivering when I heard his voice and the old tape, because it was going from the old tape. And also this feeling that something was recorded on this magnetic tape also gives its own taste to the, not taste, but it creates this, because I think we didn't talk about the sound archive at all, but for me, it has the same meaning and the same impact and the same strength of as the visual archive. And for the photographs, for example, where I was recreating sound of the photographs, I was using the motif of the wind. And with wind, I found not in the sound library, I found it an old Soviet propaganda movie, but from Azerbaijan. We went from, how to say this, open places, I don't know this English language, steps, no, like, but and this wind, also because it was filmed on 35 millimeters and with their own recording system, it had such a facture, like a texture. And I couldn't, yeah, and the texture, and I couldn't find this texture in any sound library myself. So I can tell I took the sound, just the sound of like wind, like shh, because it was so mystical and so beautiful, and I just used as a leitmotif for my film and for the photographs. Even the sound was from another place that was not in the film. So I think we also need to give attention also for the sound. And
thank you, Gidre. This is actually a very important moment. We didn't talk about sound and sound archives and what sound archives can do, but that's certainly a topic of a whole panel or a whole program, maybe for the future. And let me ask Radu and Adrian, how did your film was received locally, and what was the feedback that you have gotten to it in Romania and also internationally? If we're talking now about the impact of the archives, you said that it can have very strong emotional engagement for the audience. It can also produce and stir a lot of emotions, and certainly your film does. Do you see any impact already through the feedback?
Well, the film premiered in Forum in Berlin, and that was at the beginning of March, and 10 days later we had the lockdown in Romania, and so we didn't premiere the film locally yet. It was just screened in One World Film Festival, artistically run by our friend Andrei Rus, who included in the selection. And internationally, to be honest, it's a film that I think because of the form, and that's something to address here, not as a frustration, of course, because I think the film traveled in important places. It's now in Mar del Plata Film Festival, and it was in other film festivals as well. But because it's a long film, it's a 3 hours film, and because it's a challenging film, so to speak, in many ways, and it's not a commercial film. It doesn't have a commercial life. It will never be broadcasted on television, that's for sure. No television would take a 3 hours film made out of photographs and text, and it won't be distributed in cinemas, maybe with few exceptions locally here in Romania. But I think this is something that was something that we expected when we made the film, and we said, you know, that it is a very important issue to discuss regarding filmmaking, and not only filmmaking, how you treat it, because some people got very angry with me regarding even this film and the previous film, saying, well, you know, when you talk about this kind of topics like history, Holocaust, memory, and so on and so forth, you have to make it in a form that regular audiences make it as popular as possible, and so on and so forth, which creates, in my opinion, films which could be very interesting. I mean, we have, for instance, a local success in documentaries this year, Collective, the film of Alexander Nanau, which is a hit, and I really wish it will get to Oscar and so on. But in my opinion, it is a film too much inspired by TV aesthetics, by television aesthetics, in a way, if you want. And all these very successful films that not only in the fiction world, in the fiction films world, but in documentary filmmaking, are more and more, and that's my opinion, films made either by televisions or using television aesthetics, which sometimes is great, but sometimes can simplify a little bit the things too much, in my opinion. Or films made using these. There are many thousands, I think, workshops of documentary of any kind with tutors and so on, and they all look the same. They have the same structure. Again, some may be perfect, some may be wonderful, but as a viewer, I'm speaking now. I really have a problem with the fact that, for instance, I don't know, a film like a masterpiece like the film of Abbas Fadel of a few years ago, Iraqi Year Zero, was not at the beginning a successful film. It was rejected by festivals, television, and so. Or a film like Wang Bing, the first films he did, West of the Tracks, was not a Sundance hit because it's 9 hours long. Or a film, an archive film like Star Spangled to Death of Ken Jacobs will never be part of a television program or a streaming program. Maybe some streamers like Mubi or Doc Alliance could show this kind of films, DA films.
Yes, I think this is a very serious issue, the question of format and the question of expectations and the question of streaming platforms. And this has been an exceptionally difficult year. We're actually going to talk tomorrow about how the pandemic impacted the film festivals. That's our panel with the festival representatives, but certainly for filmmakers, it's also a hugely challenging year. And ironically, in some strange way, the spread of the VOD platforms might be more welcoming the different formats. And I think your film is certainly standing out, and I think it will find its alternatives ways of getting to the audience, if not traditional television channels. Since we have only 5 minutes left, I would like to ask very briefly Sandra and Susanna to tell a little bit about the reception of your film. To Sandra, whether you see it differently received in the Netherlands and in Indonesia. I don't know if it was screened there, and if you got any feedback, very briefly in 2 minutes. And then a question to Susanna, I'll say it right away. If your film is just premiering now in Hungary, but probably you already have some first feedbacks, you've already got viewers, questions on the website. What is your understanding? Do you have any different feedback that you didn't get in other places where the film was already screened in many other countries in the festivals? Sandra and then Susanna, please.
Well, the sad thing is that it is not screened already in Indonesia because of Corona. So I'm very looking forward, because it is really our history from the Netherlands and Indonesia. And there is still a lot of, a lot of struggle about what is the history and what kind of perspective is real. So I'm really, one of the things that was important for me is that I hope that in this film it can be as a kind of bridge towards Indonesia and towards that, we have all these kind of stories and we have to look together at the pain of these stories and see what just happened. And for me, and that was why I want to add to this history from an Indonesian perspective and also from a female perspective. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you. I hope the film will be seen by Indonesian audiences soon. Susanna.
Yes. Well, I was so lucky that the film premiered just before everything changed for all of us. So it was at Doc Leipzig last year in the international competition. And it was, I was very curious at that time, of course, what will the reaction be also in Germany, because I would say there's a sensitivity to the history in a special way. In Hungary so far at Versio, it's a different forum now. I wish there was more interaction. I mean, it's wonderful with the platform, and I had some questions about archive and about, yeah, what can I say? Yeah.
We hope to be able to also bring it back to cinemas.
Budapest is for me in any case a place I go to a lot. So I hope at some point there will be a physical screening. In Denmark, yes, it was screened at the film. Even though I would say it's also, you know, to do a film about the Holocaust, you always have against you, oh, it's so sad and it's so, you know, difficult, and it was a long time ago, and there's been many films about it. So there's a lot of things against you when you want to tell the story about these atrocities. Plus, opens a lot of question about how to do it and representation, all this. But you know, of course, I was happy. It was actually screened on national television in Denmark and Norway and Sweden. And it has received a lot of interest, and there was a lot of debate. So it is possible in some way to do it, but you know, it's yeah. What can I say? I mean,
it certainly is a year like no other.
It is a year like no other.
And as we're out of time right now, I would like to congratulate all of you on completing this extremely important and powerful works. I would like to encourage everyone to watch them on versio.org. The films are available in Hungary until November 22. And you can also use Dialog on our webpage to ask questions to the directors, and you will hopefully get a quick answer in a video message. That's it from us for now. Thank you very much for joining us, and watch more films. Don't forget that there are 4 more films in the section of Archive of the Planet, and altogether there are 50 great documentaries in this year's Versio. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.